The printer woke up behind me with that dry insect chatter old laser machines make when hot paper drags over hotter metal. Intake had gone cold enough that I could feel it through my shoes, a chill coming up from tile scrubbed so often it had lost any human smell. All that was left in the air was toner, bleach, and that chalky hospital dryness the vents kept pushing through the room. I turned because my name had hit the paper before the sheet even settled in the tray. Admitted patient, it said. Travis Eli Boudreau. For 1 second, I couldn't understand what I was looking at. Then Marlene took the form off the printer, read it with no change in her face, and signed the bottom in a hard, quick hand like she'd been waiting for it all night. "Marlene," I said, and my voice came out wrong, too thin. "Here, that's my employee file." "Not anymore," she said. Owen was beside me before I heard him move. That was one of the first things that got under my skin at Greenridge, the way people appeared in hallways that should have echoed. He held a white plastic wristband between his fingers. His voice stayed gentle, the same tone he used with frightened patients and men coming off restraints. "Stay calm for me, Travis. If you pull away now, it'll pick one for you." He fastened the band around my wrist. I jerked once, not hard enough. The barcode scanner flashed red, then green. It gave a soft beep. The terminal in front of us refreshed, and across the top of the screen in neat black letters I saw the words, "Identity conflict resolved." Marlene looked at the monitor. Owen looked at me, and all I could think was, if the conflict was resolved, why was I still there? It started 5 nights earlier with a job nobody at Greenridge checked too closely. By the time I drove into Windham County, the rain had already thinned into mist. Vermont in late fall had a way of making even daylight feel unfinished, and Greenridge Psychiatric facility looked less like a hospital than a state office complex somebody had forgotten to stop expanding. There were 3 connected buildings, all brick and old glass, with newer additions bolted onto them in pale concrete. The parking lot lights hummed above wet asphalt. The place smelled like cold metal before I even got out of the truck. I took the night orderly job because it was there, because it paid on time, and because hospitals, especially overnight, were full of systems that liked a name and a badge more than a biography. I'd built my life on places like that. Warehouses, transport services, contract work with just enough paperwork to look respectable and not enough scrutiny to get curious. Greenridge hired me in 1 interview. That should have bothered me more than it did. Inside, the heat came in dry waves from old vents set high along the walls. The air carried printer toner, disinfectant, and something powdery underneath, like ground chalk or crushed pills. Intake was quiet, too quiet for a facility that size. Phones rang, printers worked, doors clicked, but footsteps didn't travel the way they should have. The long halls swallowed them. A place that should have echoed just didn't. Marlene Judith Kessler met me in personnel wearing pale blue scrubs under a gray cardigan, her silver hair pinned back so tight it made her face look carved. And she wasn't unfriendly. That would have been easier. She was efficient in a way that made friendliness feel irrelevant. "You've done transport work," she said, scanning my file on a terminal while another printer spat out forms 2 rooms over. "Some," I said. "Psych intake experience." "Adjacent to it." That got the smallest nod. Not approval, just filing. She had me sign tax forms, policy acknowledgments, shift agreements, all with the same black pen chained to the desk. I remember the feel of the paper more than the words, warm from the printer, edges still slightly curled. When she asked for identification, she only glanced at it before entering something into the system. No call to previous employers, no extra questions. My documents went through the same way they'd gone through everywhere else for years. Cleanly, too cleanly. And there are lies you tell one time. And there are lies you live inside until they start answering for you. By then you don't even feel the shape of them all the time. You only notice when somebody touches one. Marlene printed my temporary badge and slid over an orientation packet stapled in the corner. Night orderly means patient movement, linen runs, room checks, supply support, and whatever nursing needs that doesn't require a license or a bad back. You verify in at shift start and verify out at shift end. If a unit asks, you go. She said it the way somebody might explain weather. I flipped through the packet while she set up my credentials. The first thing I noticed was how much of Greenridge depended on terminals. There was one at intake, one outside medication storage, one in every nurse's station, one by the elevators, one in a recessed wall case halfway down the oldest hall. Even the break room had a printer and a thin monitor mounted beside the coffee machine. Every station seemed to have paper trays stacked with fresh forms, admission packets, incident reports, transfer notices, discharge summaries. The place documented itself constantly. I remembered Greenridge from years earlier, before I worked there, when I did contract transport runs between facilities. I'd only been inside once, long enough to bring in a patient and wait for signatures. Two orderlies by the elevator had been talking in low voices about a transfer going to Ward 7. I asked where 7 was because the building map in the lobby only showed 6 wards. One of them looked at me for a long second and said, "Oh, you didn't hear that." The other laughed, but not like it was a joke. I did what I'd gotten good at doing back then. I let it go. Now, sitting in personnel with my new badge warming under the laminator, I almost asked Marlene about it. Almost. Instead, I read the orientation sheet. The first line said all staff had to verify their identity at the start and end of each shift. The second said not to enter Ward 7 unless my name appeared on the access list. The third said if a patient file updated without input, I had to report it immediately. The fourth said never wear a patient wristband under any circumstance. I looked up. "You've got a Ward 7? Marlene didn't answer right away. Somewhere deeper in the building, a cartwheel squealed, then went silent. "We've got areas you don't go unless you're assigned," she said. "If your name isn't on the list, you don't need to know more than that." It wasn't hostile. It was flatter than that. Final. Then she handed me my badge. Travis Eli Boudreau. I took it by reflex, and for a second my fingers didn't feel like mine. That's the kind of thing I mean when I say a lie can become load-bearing. The badge had weight. A clipped little authority. A whole life condensed into laminated plastic. I'd been wearing that name so long by then that hearing it felt ordinary. Seeing it still sometimes felt stolen. Marlene noticed my stare. "Problem?" "No," I said. "Just making sure the photo's ugly enough to be official." That got a breath that might have been a laugh. She stood. "Come on. I'll show you the route between intake, North Hall, the med station, and the staff room. Learn those, you'll survive nights here." Survive. Not work. Not settle in. Survive. Either I walked with her through halls that smelled faintly of floor wax and overheated vents. Doors were locked in layers. Buzzers clicked. Each nurse's station had a printer. Each printer had forms already queued in neat stacks, like the building expected emergencies the way normal places expected mail. Patients moved in the distance, slow and supervised. A television murmured from one common room. A man in green socks sat in a molded plastic chair staring at a darkened window, like he was waiting for somebody on the other side of the glass. At the end of the tour, we passed a broad corridor sealed by double doors with a wall terminal beside them. No sign said Ward 7. There was only a blank white access list in a clear plastic sleeve. Marlene kept walking. I felt the air change near those doors, drier, colder. I touched with a stronger toner smell, as if there were printers running non-stop somewhere beyond them. I also noticed something else. No footsteps. Mine should have echoed there, hers too. The hallway was long enough and empty enough. but our steps seemed to die at ankle height. I know now that was the first real warning I got. I didn't know what to do with it then. At the end of the hall, we found Owen Frederick Hale in the day room, crouched beside an older patient who was refusing his tea because he said the cup had the wrong initials on it. Owen didn't wear scrubs. He had on slacks, a soft brown sweater, and a lanyard with patient liaison clipped to it. He was younger than Marlene by at least 15 years, maybe early 40s, with careful hands and a face that always looked like he was listening to something beneath what you were saying. And he got the patient to drink just by changing cups. Same tea, same tray, different printed label. When he stood, Marlene introduced me. Owen shook my hand, eyes on mine a fraction too long. "New night, orderly. You're either brave or broke." "Mostly broke," I said. "That helps," he said. Something in his tone made me think he wasn't joking either. That was the last normal introduction I had in that building. My first real shift started the next evening. The sky had gone fully dark by the time I parked, and frost had gathered in the corners of the windshield. Inside, Greenridge was all recycled heat and pale light. The vents buzzed overhead, pushing that same dry, papery air through corridors that still refused to echo. I clocked in at intake. The badge scanner was set beside the staff terminal, and under a printed sign reminding employees to verify identity at start and end of shift. I tapped my badge against it. The screen loaded my file. For less than a second, the name on the monitor wasn't Travis Eli Boudreau. It was something else. I didn't get the full thing, just the shape of it. An E at the start, maybe, or an L. Too many letters. Then the text blinked and corrected itself so fast I almost convinced myself I hadn't seen it. Marlene was beside me signing narcotics count with one of the evening nurses. "Problem?" "No," I said, "a scanner lag." She glanced at the monitor, then back at her clipboard. "These systems are older than some of the patients. If it lets you in, you're in." That should have settled it. It almost did. But all through the first hour, little things kept catching the edge of my attention. A terminal in North Hall froze on a patient census, then refreshed with 2 extra names that vanished when the nurse returned with ice water. A printer near Supply Closet 3 kicked out 3 blank pages. Only they weren't blank. At the bottom of each one, on the signature line, was my name in ink-dark script. Travis Eli Boudreau. Already signed. I touched the paper. The toner was warm. The signature wasn't. It looked embedded, printed there from the start. I folded the pages in half and slipped them into my pocket before anyone else saw. The patients on nights were quieter than transport work had prepared me for. Quiet didn't mean calm. Quiet meant medicated, watched, kept inside routines. Doors opened, doors shut, televisions murmured. Somewhere a woman laughed too long at something nobody else heard. But most of the time the building sounded like machines maintaining themselves. Around midnight I brought fresh linens to South Hall and found Owen sitting with a man maybe in his 50s who kept rubbing at the skin under his hospital wristband. Not picking at it. Testing it like he thought it might come off if he learned its trick. Owen looked up when I came in. "Travis, right? Could you grab Mr. Bell another blanket?" The patient turned his head slowly. It was the kind of stare you get used to in institutional places, too direct and a little unfocused. Then his eyes sharpened on my badge. "No," he said. Owen went still. The patient smiled, and I felt a cold little thread move down my back before I knew why. "Not Travis," he said. "You're Eli." My hand tightened on the linen cart. Neither of them could have known why that mattered, and not unless somebody had gone digging somewhere they had no business digging. Eli wasn't what I used day to day. It was part of the name on my paperwork, part of the name on the documents I'd taken after a rain-slick road and a crumpled car and a body I told myself was already beyond help. The dead man had been Travis Eli Boudreau. I'd kept all three names on paper because changing less meant surviving more. But in the life I'd built afterward, nobody called me Eli. Nobody. Not once. Owen recovered first. "Mr. Bell, where did you hear that name?" The man looked confused now, like he'd forgotten speaking. "It's on him." "It isn't," I said too fast. Mr. Bell kept smiling. "Used to be." The room went dry in my mouth. The blanket in my hands felt heavier than it had any right to. Owen stood and crossed to me, not touching. He just near enough that I could smell coffee on his breath and hand sanitizer on his sleeves. "Why don't I finish up here?" he said softly. "You can get back to linens." He was helping me. I knew that. It still felt like being watched. In the hall, the air from the vents seemed hotter and thinner. I told myself patients said strange things all the time. I'd spent years hearing people pull names from nowhere, ages from nowhere, whole histories from nowhere. That was the job. It meant nothing. Then the printer by the nurse's station started up again. I watched it feed out another form. Blank, except for my name at the bottom, already signed. This time there were initials beside it too, tiny and cramped, the way people initial documents they've stopped reading. TEB. I hadn't done that in years, and that was how the man on the license had marked things. I'd learned it from old records so well it had become muscle memory. I hadn't used it at Greenridge. I was careful not to. I looked around. No one seemed to notice. I took the form, turned it over, then checked the header. Admission acknowledgement. No patient name. No room assignment. Just boilerplate language about personal effects, consent to inventory, unit restrictions, attending physician to follow. And my signature. That was when I started feeling less like I'd seen a glitch and more like something in the building had touched a seam and found the rot underneath. Looking back, that was the moment I should have walked out, driven south, and never used another badge again. Instead, I kept working. You do that when you've survived by staying useful. You keep your hands moving. You let your mind trail behind until it catches up or breaks. Around 1 in the morning, Owen found me in the supply room restocking gloves. The room smelled like cardboard and bleach. The fluorescent light flickered hard enough to make the shadows pulse between the shelves. He closed the door most of the way. Not shut, just enough for privacy. "Has your file shifted yet?" he asked. I laughed because I didn't know what else to do with a question like that. "My file did what?" His expression didn't change. "Shifted. Wrong date of birth for a second, different spelling. Somebody else's middle name. Usually it starts small." I stared at him. "You need to tell me if that's happened." The shelves hummed faintly with the vibration from the vent above us. The whole place seemed to breathe old heat. "I had a scanner glitch," I said. That's it. And a patient called you something he shouldn't know." I didn't remember telling him that, then realized I hadn't had to. He'd been there. "I work in patient liaison," Owen said. "Mostly that means I explain processes and absorb panic. Unofficially, it means I notice when the building starts making room for somebody." "Making room," he nodded once. "Staff identities shift overnight sometimes. Schedules change, credentials update. People start answering to things they weren't called the day before. Most of them don't notice at first, or they decide not to." A cold wave of anger surprised me with how fast it came up. "If this is some hazing thing, I'm not in the mood." "It isn't. You expect me to believe a hospital changes people's identities between shifts. I expect you to tell me whether the system has recognized you." The word recognized hit harder than it should have, like he hadn't said discovered or flagged or corrupted. Recognized. I set the glove box down. "What exactly are you saying?" Owen leaned back against the shelf, hands loose at his sides. Calm, Too calm for a man talking like this. I'm saying Greenridge keeps records the way some places keep mold. Once it gets into the walls, everything starts tasting like it. Usually that's harmless. Wrong room number. Old medication still listed. Duplicate consult. But sometimes it's not harmless. Sometimes the file stops following the person. He looked me dead in the eye. Sometimes the person starts following the file. The silence after that felt thick. The vent buzzed. A cart rolled past outside without any audible footsteps pushing it. Just wheels and silence. I said, Marlene would have mentioned something like this. Marlene believes in procedure. And you don't? He thought about that. I believe procedure is what the system wants you to believe in. That should have been enough to make me dismiss him. Any sensible person would have, but there was no mania in him, no thrill, no storytelling hunger. Owen sounded like a man describing a leak in the roof. Annoying, specific, not negotiable. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded slip of paper. What's the official rule about Ward 7? I answered before I could stop myself. Don't enter unless your name's on the access list. And what if it appears there? Then I guess I enter. He tucked the slip away. That's the problem. Something moved in the hall. We both looked. No one there. Then Owen stepped closer and lowered his voice. Ward 7 isn't restricted to keep patients in, he said. It's to keep the system contained. He opened the door and left me standing between stacked gloves and bleach wipes with my pulse hammering in my throat. The rest of the shift I watched other people more than I watched the work. That's how trust starts getting eaten in a place like that. Not with one big betrayal, but with small, private recalculations. Marlene glanced at terminals too quickly, as if she was checking whether they were checking her. Nurses signed forms without reading headers. A tech who'd introduced himself as Jared on my first night got called Jeremy by 2 staff members and answered both times without blinking. No one corrected anything. No one asked questions out loud. At the end of shift, I verified out. The screen showed my name correctly. Then it printed a second badge. Same photo, different employee number. I left that one in the tray and walked out before the machine could decide I was supposed to take it. I slept through the day with the blank forms in my jacket pocket and woke with the shape of Owen's warning sitting in my chest like a swallowed object. By the time I drove back to Greenridge, I'd convinced myself I was going in for one reason only. I needed to prove to myself there was a rational explanation. Old software, broken permissions, sloppy administration, something ugly and human. The night started almost normally. Almost. The break room coffee had burned down to sludge on the warmer. The air smelled like stale grounds and copier heat. There was a fan in the window that didn't move but still clicked once every few seconds like it remembered turning. I was alone when I opened the drawer looking for plastic stirrers and found a folded note tucked beneath takeout menus and an outdated fire drill map. The paper was softer than the official forms, yellowed at the edges, as if it had been opened and closed many times. The handwriting was sharp and slanted, done with somebody else's pen in a hurry. Do not trust the printed list. It changes you. If your name appears twice, erase one before it erases you. I read it twice, then a third time, not because it was hard to understand, because it was too easy. And the break room printer kicked on behind me so suddenly I flinched. It spat out a fresh access list for restricted units. I looked at it without meaning to. Ward 7. There were 4 names on the list. Mine wasn't one of them. Then the page twitched as the printer took it back halfway, made a grinding sound, and pushed out a corrected copy over the first. Now there were 5 names. Mine was the 4th. I could feel sweat starting under my shirt despite the cold room. Owen came in carrying a paper cup of soup and stopped when he saw my face. His eyes dropped to the note in my hand. So you found it. You knew it was there. I hoped you would look before they updated you into compliance. I held up the printed list. My name wasn't there a second ago. I know. Who wrote this? He gave the smallest shrug. Yeah, it depends which version of the story you want. In one, a nurse from nights wrote it after her husband stopped recognizing her off shift. In another, I did. I've seen both signatures. I almost told him to stop. Instead, I said, "You're talking like that's normal. At Greenridge, it is." I laid the note and the list side by side on the table. The paper edges lined up almost perfectly, official and unofficial, command and counter-command. The printer smell around them was so strong it coated the back of my throat. The orientation sheet says if my name's on the access list, I can go in, I said. The note says don't trust the list. Which one keeps me safe? Owen's gaze flicked toward the hall, then back to me. That's the right question. The bad answer is that it depends who's doing the updating. Before I could press him, Marlene stepped into the room with a medication cart checklist in one hand. She took in the scene in a glance note, list, Owen, me. "Break's over," she said. I turned the list toward her. "Why is my name on Ward 7 access?" She didn't even seem surprised. "Because you're assigned." "Assigned by who?" "The system routes where it's needed." "That's not an answer." "It is here." Owen set his soup down, untouched. "Marlene." His tone wasn't pleading, it was a warning. Marlene ignored him. "If your file has discrepancies, restricted review may be necessary. It's standard." "Standard for staff?" I asked. "Standard for whatever the system flags." That word again. Flagged. Not selected, not evaluated, flagged. Like luggage or lab work or spoiled inventory. I tapped the handwritten note. This says the printed list changes you." Marlene's jaw tightened just enough for me to see it. "Unofficial materials are often written by frightened people. Frightened people confuse correlation with cause." "Do they also write fake names onto access lists?" "Mr. Boudreau," she said, and the use of the full name made my skin tighten. "Greenridge functions because staff follow procedure. The minute everyone starts honoring anonymous notes over institutional rules, patients get hurt." There it was, the first real betrayal, not because Marlene lied, but because she sounded like the trustworthy one. Procedure, safety, duty, all the words built to push a man into the slot waiting for him. Owen stepped between us just slightly, enough to break the straight line. "And if procedure is the vector?" Marlene met his eyes. "Then improvisation has killed more people than it saved." The room went still around them. Whatever sat between those two had history in it. I could hear the vent ticking, pushing dry heat over the table. I could smell the hot plastic of the printer. Owen said, "Don't verify twice tonight." Marlene said, "Verify every time you're prompted." Neither looked at me when they said it. They looked at each other. Collaborative horror, if that's what you want to call it, doesn't begin with monsters. It begins with two people you need, both sounding reasonable, and the understanding that trusting either one may be the thing that gets you taken apart. I folded the note and put it in my pocket. Later that shift, I got proof Owen wasn't exaggerating. I was helping on West Hall when a woman named Denise Harper asked me if the snow had started yet. She was maybe 60, hair pinned with a barrette shaped like a dragonfly. Hands stained yellow from nicotine she no longer had access to. Her chart clipped outside the room said Denise Harper. Her cup said Denise. Even her crossword had D. Harper penciled at the top. "No snow yet," I told her. "Just cold." She sighed. "Always said I was born in the wrong state." The hallway clock behind me clicked, then skipped forward exactly 3 minutes. Not sped up, not glitched and reset. It ticked once, then jumped 3 full minutes ahead. I turned to it. When I looked back, the terminal outside Denise's room had refreshed on its own. I watched the chart update line by line without anyone touching it. Denise Harper vanished. In her place, the file rebuilt itself under the name Helen Marchand. Allergies changed. Primary contact changed. And date of birth changed. Marital history changed. I felt the air leave my body. A nurse came past carrying meds. I pointed at the screen. "Did you see that?" She glanced at it. "See what?" "The file just changed. That's a different patient." The nurse checked the med cup in her hand, then the chart. "No, that's Helen. She's been in this room since August." Denise, or Helen, looked up from her bed. "I told you I hate the cold." Not the same voice. It was still hers physically, but the rhythm had altered. The little smoker's rasp was gone. Even the way she held the pen had changed from cramped fist to loose fingers. I stepped into the room. "Ma'am, what is your name?" She frowned at me like I was the confused one. "Helen Marchand." Is this some kind of orientation joke? The dragonfly barrette was gone. I know how that sounds. And I watched it happen anyway. 1 second it had been clipped into her hair, metallic wings catching fluorescent light. The next it wasn't there, and the woman touching the left side of her head looked like she'd never worn it in her life. I backed out into the hall. The nurse was staring now, but not at the terminal. At me. "You all right?" I wasn't. What frightened me more than the file changing was the complete lack of resistance around it. No ripple through the ward, no confusion, no double takes. Only me, standing in a hallway that smelled like disinfectant and hot paper, watching a human life get rephrased. And then realizing I might be the only person still holding the previous sentence. That was when helplessness really arrived. Not fear, helplessness. The understanding that this thing moved faster than thought, faster than protest, faster than memory could organize itself around it. You can't correct a record that's already made everybody else forget. I found Owen near intake. Before I could say a word, he looked at the hallway clock over my shoulder and muttered, 3 minutes now. That's worse." "What happened to Denise Harper?" He didn't waste time pretending. "Depends whether you mean administratively or metaphysically." "Don't do that." His face softened for half a second. "I know." I told him what I'd seen. He listened without interrupting, one hand braced on the back of a chair, fingers tapping once for each detail. When I finished, he said, "When the system updates without input, official policy says to report it immediately, right?" "Yeah." "Have you noticed what happens every time somebody reports one?" I thought back. Each time I'd seen a nurse log a discrepancy, a printer somewhere else had started up, a new form, a new wristband, a transfer notice. "It spreads it," I said. Owen nodded. "Reporting validates the update. That's why the official rules are poison once you're already in motion." Marlene heard the last part as she came through intake doors. Her expression didn't sharpen. If anything, it got sadder, which was worse. "You think withholding documentation stops it?" she asked Owen. "I think feeding it certainty helps." She set a stack of patient binders on the desk. "And uncertainty leaves people split." That word sank in deep because I understood it before I wanted to. Split, not wrong, not corrupt. Split. Marlene turned to me. "Your access list updated again." I didn't have to ask which one. You're scheduled for Ward 7 review at 2 in the morning." The vent above intake buzzed so low I felt it in my teeth. Owen said, "No." Marlene finally looked at him with something like anger. "His name is already duplicating. If we keep him on general floor, it will propagate. You don't know that. I know what happens when we delay." Her eyes moved back to me, and her next question tightened the last open loop until it hurt. "Which version of you is on shift tonight, Travis?" Not who are you? Which version? I wish I could tell you that I left then, that I tore off the badge and ran into the parking lot and kept driving until daylight. The truth is uglier and more ordinary. I stayed because leaving would still leave me with 2 signed admission forms in my pocket, a hallway full of people who'd watched a woman become somebody else, and a name that had started appearing in places it shouldn't. Also because some part of me knew exactly why a place like Greenridge might notice a man like me. I just hadn't said it out loud yet. At 1:45, the access list outside the sealed corridor printed again. My name was still there. Under it in smaller text was escort required. Owen stood on one side of me, Marlene on the other. If you'd seen us from the nurses' station, we probably looked like any staff trio headed somewhere unpleasant but necessary. The hallway was cool enough that the hair on my arms lifted. Ahead, the double doors toward 7 reflected us dimly. Beside them, the wall terminal pulsed with a ready light. I can stop this for one more cycle, Owen said quietly. Maybe. But if your file's already active, it won't stop trying to pull you in. Marlene folded her arms. Entering doesn't finalize anything by itself, it clarifies. Owen turned on her. That's a lie of emphasis, and you know it. It's the only chance he has to choose. There it was. Not safety, not procedure, choice. A bad kind, maybe, but real. I said, why me? Neither answered immediately, then Owen did. Because you're inconsistent. The word landed like a slap because it was so clinical. Marlene added almost gently, and because this building is built to find inconsistencies. The terminal beeped. My badge hadn't touched it, nothing had. The screen woke on its own. Access authorized, it said. The doors clicked open. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Not rot, not chemicals, paper. Warm printer toner, fresh labels, dust baked by electronics. In all of it threaded through that sterile, chalky air Greenridge carried everywhere. Underneath was something colder, almost metallic, like old keys or blood on a coin, faint enough that maybe I imagined it. The second thing was the sound. Rows of machines, not loud. Worse than loud. Continuous. The soft draw and spit of printers, cooling fans. Hard drives or server stacks or something with a mechanical pulse, all layered beneath the buzz of overhead vents. It made the whole floor feel alive in an administrative way, as if the building were processing itself. Ward 7 wasn't a ward. It was an office floor built inside a hospital and hidden by hospital doors. The room beyond the corridor opened wide, bigger than the floor plan should have allowed. Stations stretched in lines under dim panels. Terminals glowed on long counters. E-printers sat in clusters, each feeding forms into trays that orderlies in pale uniforms collected and sorted into color-coded bins. Not one of them looked at us. Along the far wall sat patients in straight-backed chairs, calm as people waiting at the Department of Motor Vehicles. Some wore hospital gowns. Some wore street clothes. All of them had wristbands. Every few seconds, one of the terminals near them refreshed, and a staff member would rise, cross over, swap a chart, adjust a wristband, or ask a quiet, verifying question. Name, date of birth, emergency contact. And sometimes, after the answer, the patient would blink once and reply differently the next time. Owen had been right about one thing above all else. Ward 7 didn't feel like confinement. It felt like containment. In a chamber built around a process nobody wanted touching the rest of the hospital any more than it already had. I stopped dead 3 steps in. Marlene didn't urge me forward. Owen didn't either. They both knew I was already seeing too much. At the nearest station, a monitor displayed 3 identity files side by side. All 3 were mine, my face in each. The first was Travis Eli Boudreau, employee, orderly, active. The second carried a name I hadn't seen in years. My actual name. The one I'd been born under, before the road, before the ditch, before the wallet in the wet grass and the choice to become somebody the world had stopped needing. Noah Mercer. It sat there on the screen with my face beside it, flagged deceased in one field and unverified in another. The third file was worse. It wasn't exactly either of us. It was a welded thing. Half dates from one life, half addresses from another, a social record stitched through employment history like somebody had tried to force two incompatible stories into one neat folder and succeeded just enough to make it dangerous. Status, misfiled identity. A printer near my elbow started feeding paper. Every page held some version of me. That was the point where my legs tried to quit. Owen caught my arm before I fully staggered, not restraining, just steadying. His hand was warm. Mine wasn't. "You said entering finalizes changes," I whispered. Owen kept his eyes on the screens. "Entering finalizes the opportunity, not the result." Marlene moved to the terminal and typed something with brisk, practiced fingers. "Now he can see the cue. That's more mercy than most get." I looked around again. It really looked this time. One of the patients by the wall was speaking with a family member on a landline phone. As I watched, a new chart was delivered to the desk beside him. The staff member listening at the call nodded, crossed out one name on the visitor log and wrote another. The patient on the phone paused, frowned at nothing, then resumed the conversation using a different last name as if he'd always answered to it. No panic, no scream, just an adjustment. The horror wasn't physical first, it was intimate, efficient. It knew where to put the knife. Marlene opened a folder on the terminal. Old transport records bloomed across the screen. I recognized the county road before I recognized the date. Rain, guardrail, headlights turning white in runoff. The crash I'd told myself had happened too fast, too hard, too late for me to change. And the one I hadn't reported because the wallet on the pavement had looked like a door opening. I tasted metal in my mouth. "How did you get that?" I asked. Marlene didn't answer. Owen did quietly. "The system trawls for unresolved identity conflicts, death certificates that never settle cleanly, bodies identified by paper instead of witness, employment histories with impossible continuity, people who fit better on records than in their own skin." Marlene said, "Greenridge receives the overflow, patients first, staff second. Anyone embedded in the institution long enough can trigger review. So this hospital isn't treating people." Marlene's fingers paused on the keyboard. "It is. Just not for what you assumed." Owen looked at me then, and there was no judgment in his face, which somehow made it worse. "It's correcting inconsistencies in identity." Correcting. That word was almost enough to make me hit him. "Correcting?" I said. "You mean rewriting?" "If the records are wrong, maybe that's the same thing," Marlene said. "Wrong according to who?" Neither of them answered that, because neither of them knew, or because both of them did and couldn't say it in a way a human being could survive hearing. I looked back to the file marked Noah Mercer. My real name felt obscene on the screen, exposed, tender, more indecent than nakedness. Owen said, "You need to understand what's happening before it understands you completely." I almost laughed at that. Too late. He guided me down the row to a quieter station where fewer screens were active. There the air was colder. The printer scent gave way to an ozone smell from overworked electronics. A woman in scrubs was asleep upright at a desk with a stack of corrected forms in her lap, like she'd gotten tired mid-prayer. Owen said, "People here assume Ward 7 changes them because they come in wrong. That isn't all of it. What else is there?" He looked at the terminals, then at me. "Some people come in because they're already changed and the rest of the world hasn't caught up. Some come in because paperwork made them impossible. Some come in because two versions of the same life are competing and something has to win. And some, he hesitated, some come in because the system notices the lie before they do. That was when I told them, not everything, not with noble clarity, not in one clean confession. I told it like people tell truths they've been carrying too long, sideways and defensive and ugly. I said there had been a crash years ago on a road outside Baton Rouge. I said I'd stopped. I said the man behind the wheel had been dead or close enough that I couldn't tell. I said I took the wallet and the documents and walked away. I said by the time the story hardened around it, the silence had become a life. Employment, taxes, housing, badges, background checks that only looked where the paper pointed. I didn't tell them about the family at first. Owen made me. "Did anyone come looking?" he asked. I stared at the active cursor on the terminal because I couldn't look at either of them. There were notices online, missing posts. His sister, I think, maybe cousin. Somebody kept asking if anyone had seen the truck. The room felt colder after that, not morally, physically, and the vent above us exhaled a stream of dry air that smelled like dust shaken out of old files. Marlene said, "An unresolved death creates administrative pressure. An assumed identity creates more. Built over years inside institutions, it becomes attractive." To what? To systems that prefer closure over truth. That sentence has lived with me ever since, because she might have been talking about computers or hospitals or people like me. A nearby terminal chimed. One of my files moved to the top of the queue, then another, then the hybrid. All three turned red. Status pending resolution. Owen inhaled once, steady and resigned, like he'd known this was coming and was sorry it had arrived anyway. "Then we're out of time." He led me to a sealed substation at the far end of Ward 7, a glassed-in booth with one terminal, one chair, one barcode scanner, and a tray stocked with blank wristbands. Through the glass, I could see the rows of updating files and the waiting patients beyond. Marlene stayed outside the booth, one hand on the door, face unreadable. "This is where conflicts get resolved," Owen said. "I don't want any part of this." "I know. Then help me leave." He didn't lie to me. That was one mercy. I can't. Because the system outside had already started printing. My intake form. Admitted patient, it said. My name on top. Just like in the moment I opened with. Marlene took it from the tray and signed. Her hand didn't shake. I spun toward her. "You said I had a choice." "You do," she said. "But you need a patient band to access identity deletion. Staff credentials don't authorize irreversible actions. Patient status does." It felt like betrayal because it was betrayal. Necessary or not, it was still the moment she moved me from colleague to subject. The hospital had an official rule that said never wear a patient wristband under any circumstance. Now the only way forward was the exact violation it forbade. Owen held the band between his fingers. "If you pull away now, it'll auto-resolve. The hybrid will probably win." "Probably?" His eyes met mine. Honest. Terrified for me. "Probably." He fastened the wristband around my arm. The scanner beeped. Identity conflict resolved, except it wasn't. Not yet. What the system had resolved was jurisdiction. I was now legible to the booth. On the screen, 3 files waited with little empty boxes beside them. "Select duplicate for deletion," the terminal read. My throat closed. His option A sat there under the stolen life I'd built. Travis Eli Boudreaux. Years of work, housing history, training records, the very badge that had gotten me through the front door. Delete that, and I let the dead man go. I lost everything constructed on top of him. I might walk out nameless. I might not walk out at all. Option B sat under Noah Mercer, the boy I'd been, the man I'd buried under another man's paperwork. Delete that, and I stopped being split. Clean, stable, legal, permanent. I erased the last true thing about myself and fully became the lie. The hybrid file pulsed between them like a threat. Outside the booth, printers accelerated. The whole floor seemed to lean in. This was the moral center of it, if you can call any center moral at all. There wasn't a right answer waiting under the fear, and there were two forms of guilt and a machine that wanted certainty. Owen put a hand flat to the glass. You have to choose before it does. How do I know which one leaves me alive? A strange look passed over his face then, something almost rueful. You don't, Marlene said through the intercom. Choose the file that makes the least contradiction. That's not the same as the truth. No, she said, it isn't. Then Owen did something I still don't know whether to call brave or unforgivable. He opened the adjacent terminal, pulled up his own records, and turned the monitor so I could see. There were two Owen Hales, not typo duplicates. Lives. One showed Massachusetts birth records, a brief marriage, a social work license, no accent in the internal audio note attached to intake. The other showed New Hampshire schooling, no marriage, a different prior employer, and a clipped northern vowel pattern in a recorded grievance interview. Same face, same body, different histories. I've been holding a split longer than you, he said. I stayed because I thought I could help people through it. Maybe I did, maybe I just delayed them. Owen, don't, Marlene said, and for the first time she sounded frightened. He didn't look at her. He looked at me. You asked which one leaves you alive. Sometimes the answer is whichever one can still choose. He selected one of his own files, deleted it. There was no flash, no collapse, no dramatic pulse through the room. Owen simply blinked. Then he straightened in a way I hadn't seen before, shoulders pulling back, chin lifting. When he spoke again, his accent had shifted, vowels flatter, consonants cleaner. Even the rhythm of his breathing changed. He looked at me with the same eyes and a different life behind them. Right, he said, calm as ever. That's done. Your turn. I think that disturbed me more than if he'd vanished, because he remained, helpful, present, continuous enough to hold the conversation, changed enough that the person finishing it wasn't quite the one who'd started. Marlene closed her eyes briefly, then opened them. You didn't have to do that. New Owen, or corrected Owen, gave the smallest shrug. I was already choosing every day. At least this way I picked. He turned back to me. The system punishes hesitation, not remorse. If there's anything in you that's still yours, follow that. You want the truth of what I thought then. I thought about a rain-smashed windshield and a wallet in wet grass. And I thought about a woman online writing that her brother never stayed gone without calling. I thought about every payroll deposit and apartment lease and polite introduction made in a dead man's name. I thought about how easy it would be to keep him, to click once and let the world stay arranged around the lie because I was used to breathing inside it. And I thought about what kind of thing could walk out of Ward 7 stable, legal, and clean after choosing that. Not who. What? My hand hovered over the stolen file, then moved, selected, deleted. The room didn't shake, the glass didn't crack. Administrative horror doesn't respect the theater we want from it. It works like a stamp. One moment the file was there, the next it wasn't. Everything after happened in layers. First, the hybrid file flickered violently. He feeled, stripping out line by line as if the system had lost the stitch pattern. Then Noah Mercer moved to primary. Status changed from deceased to active, then to provisional, then finally to verified with restrictions. Outside the booth, half the printed forms in the trays refed themselves into the machines. Wristbands labeled Boudreaux jammed and vanished. A visitor log near the wall updated so fast the pages blurred. Marlene checked 3 screens at once, her hands moving with sudden urgency. Go now, she said, before the outside systems finished syncing. Go where? I asked. Out. Knew Owen opened the booth door. She means the building. We moved fast through Ward 7. Patients in the waiting chairs looked up as I passed, and for one sickening second I thought each of them knew my face from some other life. And the air in the corridor beyond was colder than before, the silence under our steps deeper. My wristband felt too tight. I tore at it as we walked. At the double doors, Marlene stopped. I turned back. "You're not coming." Her gaze moved past me to Owen. Something unspoken passed there. History again. Loss again. Maybe both. "I have rounds," she said. That was such a nurse thing to say, so small against everything around us that I nearly laughed. Instead, I said, "Did you know from the start?" She considered that. "I knew your file was thin in the wrong places. I knew the system liked you too quickly. I didn't know which of you would come in." "Which of you, not which name." I looked at Owen, or the version of him standing there now. "Are you still Owen?" He gave me a tired, almost kind smile. "Enough for tonight." Then he reached out. I took the patient band from my wrist and dropped it into a red disposal bin by the wall terminal. "Don't verify out," he said. I listened. That may be the only reason I'm still capable of telling this story. I walked through intake as sunrise began to gray the eastern windows. The front desk printer kicked once and produced a new badge in the discharge tray. Not employee issue. Temporary access. 1 day valid. My name printed on it cleanly and correctly. I won't tell you the name. Some things still feel dangerous spoken aloud in sequence. The parking lot air hit wet and freezing, full of dawn and dead leaves and the faint diesel smell from a delivery truck somewhere on the road. It was the first air in days that didn't taste like toner. I stood there too long with the badge in one hand and my jacket unzipped, I just breathing like somebody who'd been under something heavy and didn't trust the lift. When I finally looked back at Greenridge, the building was already ordinary again. Brick, windows, early staff arriving with coffee. No sign over any entrance said Ward 7. No one ran after me, no alarm sounded. The world outside was always the cruelest part. It kept going. I spent the next 2 days in a motel off the interstate because I didn't know where else to go. My old bank login still worked, then it didn't. My email recognized me, then asked security questions from a childhood that was finally mine again. A payroll app from Greenridge sent me a separation notice addressed to a name I hadn't seen since I was 19. My driver's license in the wallet looked wrong every time I opened it, as if the state seal had been printed over an old scar. I kept waiting for police, or federal agents, or nobody at all. What came instead was worse: consistency. By the third day, outside records had settled into a shape. Some followed one trail, some followed another. A lease I'd signed under the stolen name no longer existed in the building portal, but the apartment still had my furniture in it when I went back. A utility bill recognized the address and my face at the office counter, but printed a receipt under a different first name than the woman behind the desk had just used out loud. It was like reality had committed to the correction without agreeing on what exactly it had corrected. Loop 2 never closed. I don't think it can. Late that night. Late. She's sitting in the motel with the air unit rattling stale heat and the blue light of my laptop burning my eyes. I found the report. Missing person. Recent. My face in the photo. Not an old photo either. Current haircut. Same scar by the chin, same jacket I'd been wearing outside Greenridge 3 mornings earlier. Under it was a name that wasn't the one on the badge I walked out with. And wasn't the one I'd been born with either. It was new, or maybe old in some place I haven't reached yet. The report said he was last seen in southern Vermont. It gave a height close enough to mine and a description of a man who looked tired, cooperative, prone to confusion. If found, Contact local authorities immediately. I read it until the words stopped behaving like language, and then I touched the pale mark still circling my wrist where the plastic band had been, and I realized I had started checking every form I signed for blank space beneath my name.